Let's begin. The last session of today on the environment. We welcome the Secretary of Environment and his team. And so can the Secretary give a speech? I would like to brief members on the part of the estimates relating to the Environment Bureau and the key focus of our work in the new financial year. In 2018 financial year, the ENB and the department under my portfolio are allocated with about 17 billion, which is about 26% or 3.5 billion more than the revised estimate for 2017-18. Of the total allocation, recurrent expenditure accounts for about 9.4 billion, up 1.5 billion or 18.4% from the revised estimate for 2017-18. The additional allocation is mainly for taking forward various initiatives, including meeting the operation fees of additional waste facilities such as We Park and the Phase 1 of the Organic Resources Recovery Centers, ORRC, taking forward the Producer Responsibility Scheme, preparation for the Municipal Solid Waste Charging Scheme, setting up outreach teams, and the management of food waste, operation of Community Green Station CGS, handling public fill, implementation of initiative of strategic landfill extensions, implementing various nature conservation and biodiversity initiatives, set up the Countryside Conservation Office COCO, coordinate conservation projects, implementing various air pollution control programs, implementing the initiatives in relation to combating climate change, promoting renewable energy RE and energy efficiency, taking forward measures to enhance the quality of coastal water, Victoria Harbour, and step up marine refuse cleansing services for tackling marine refuse problem, and improving sewage treatment facilities. As regard the number of posts, there will be a net increase of 211 posts in the ENB and the Environmental Protection Department in 2018-19, representing an increase of 11%. And provision of projects under the Capital Works Reserve Fund, non-recurrent expenditure, and capital account in 2018-19 is about $7.6 billion, representing an increase of $2.1 or 36.9% over the revised estimate for 2017-18. The increase is mainly for meeting for expense of various capital works projects, including the Integrated Waste Management Facilities Phase 1, ORRC Phase 2, Facilities Sustainable Development Recycling Industries, the Southeast New Territories Landfill Extension, and SAM Works for its Kwun Chong Sewage Pumping Station, especially of Satao Kok Sewage Treatment Works Phase 1, Category B, and implementing energy-saving projects in government buildings, and so on. And I'll give you a brief outline of the work priorities of ENB in the coming year. On combating climate change, ENB will continue to coordinate the efforts of various bureau and department in implementing the enhanced climate change work plan under the Steering Committee on Climate Change, chaired by the Chief Executive of Administration. The government has set up a target to reduce our carbon intensity by 65 to 70% by 2030 compared to 2005 level, equivalent reduction of 26 to 36%, resulting in a reduction of per capita emissions from 5.7 tons in 2015 to 3.3 to 3.8 tons in 2030. Pursuant to the Paris Agreement, parties should strive to formulate and communicate by 2020 their long-term low greenhouse gas emissions development strategy. To this end, the government has invited Council for Sustainable Development to conduct a public engagement exercise in 2018-19 financial year, so as to tap and engage the views of the community to developing Hong Kong's long-term decarbonization strategy up to 2050. ENB shall continue its publicity effort to raise public awareness of the importance of combating climate change and highlight the key measures that the government will undertake itself in conjunction with various stakeholders to enhance publicity. A total of 15 million has been earmarked under the Environment and Conservation Fund in 2017 and 2018-19 financial year to subsidize non-profit-making organizations and carry out public education activities and demonstration projects on climate change. ENB will also launch a low-carbon living calculator in the second quarter this year. This calculator helps the public assess and learn how to reduce their carbon emissions in search of clothing, food, living, and travel, thereby promoting the behavior change towards low-carbon living. The government continues to taking the lead to apply RE on a wider and larger scale, and creating conditions to enable the private sector and the community to consider adopting renewable energy. In the 2017-18 financial year, we earmarked $200 million to bureau and departments to implement RE projects. About $100 million have been approved for the relevant departments to conduct these projects. In order to install RE facilities at more government premises, we will increase the funding by $800 million from $200 million to $1 billion. We are also implementing various large-scale RE projects, including the successful pilot scheme of floating photovoltaic system at Chesapeake Reservoir and the Plover Cove Reservoir. Apart from government projects, we'll also introduce new measures under the post-2018 Scheme of Control Agreements, SCAs, signed with the power companies to further promote development of distributed RE in a broader horizon, including introduction of feed-in tariff scheme, FIT, and the RE certificate schemes. Our main objective for introducing FIT is to produce incentives to develop distributed RE. After consideration of the outcome of the independent consultancy study, we've decided to set the FIT rates at $3, $4, and $5 per unit of university electricity, having regard to the generation capacity of the RE concerned. We believe that the level FIT rates would help to drastically reduce the payback period of most RE systems to about 10 years, and in turn facilitate more proactive consideration by individuals or organizations of the installation of RE system at their places. In addition, power companies will also sell RE certificates, through the purchase of which the organizations and the public can support the development of RE in Hong Kong. At the same time, the revenue from such sale will use to alleviate the tariff impact of the introduction of FIT. We've already submitted a relevant paper to the LegCo panel on environmental affairs, and we'll provide more details of the aforementioned scheme next week. The Energy Saving Plan for the Hong Kong's built environment 2015 to 2050 plus has a target to reduce energy intensity by 40% by 2025 using 2005 as a base. The government will continue to lead by example to promote energy efficiency and conservation, EENC, as well as green building. To achieve the 5% electricity saving target for government buildings from 2015-16 to 2019-20, at least $600 million has been earmarked so far to help bureau and departments to implement energy-saving projects. To further encourage EENC in private buildings, we propose that the tax deduction period be shortened from the current 5 years to 1 year for capital expenses on RE and building energy efficiency installations. To encourage the public to use energy-efficient electrical appliances, we aim to complete the legislative amendment process of Phase 3 of the Mandatory Energy Efficiency Labeling Scheme in mid-2018. The power companies also play an important role in the promotion of energy saving. Under the post-2018 SCAs, power companies will introduce a series of measures to promote EENC and will brief the LegCo panel on environmental affairs on the details of this program next week. In gist, under the aforementioned SCAs, the existing energy efficiency funds and the incentive scheme in relation to energy saving will be considerably expanded. The companies will also establish the community energy saving funds, with funding from piling back over half of the incentives earned as a result of promoting energy saving to assist disadvantaged groups and for the community to further promote energy saving. Improving air quality has all along been one of our key priorities. Apart from ongoing initiatives such as phasing out progressively pre-Euro 4 diesel commercial vehicles by the end of 2019 and strengthening the control of emissions from petrol and liquefied petroleum LPG vehicles, will continue to waive in full the first registration tax FRT for electrical commercial vehicles, electric motor vehicles, and electric motor tricycles until 31st of March 2021 to promote the use of electric vehicles, EVs, as replacement of their conventional counterparts. As for electric private cars, on the one hand, the government has to control the growth of private cars to avoid causing traffic congestion and aggravating roadside air pollution. On the other hand, we hope to encourage car owners to go for EVs as far as possible when purchasing private cars. Hence, apart from continuing with the current FRT concession of up to $97,500 until 31st of March 2021, we will also launch a new one-for-one replacement scheme to allow eligible private car owners to buy a new electric private car and scrap an eligible old private car to enjoy a higher FRT concession of up to $250,000. On pollution from vessels, we're drafting new regulation to mandate vessels within the waters of Hong Kong to use compliant fuel, including low sulfur fuel with sulfur content not exceeding 0.5%. Secretary, please speed up. It's been over 10 minutes. So, with time control at the domestic marine emissions control area of the Pearl River Delta region. Besides, we're also drafting amendment regulations to tighten emission standards of non-road vehicles operating in specified locations such as airport container terminals, to bring them in line with the latest statutory emission standard for newly registered vehicles. Over the years, we've been collaborating with the Guangdong government and set reduction targets for the emission of 4 major air pollutants to improve regional air quality. Chairman, I know that you have a lot of concern for nature conservation. Let's begin the questions right away. Mr. Dennis Kwok, 4 minutes. EMB 123 on air quality review. And the respondent mentioned that you will take into account the public health and efficiency. And for the new review of the air quality objectives, for the public health, will it take the top priority and put at the forefront and above the economics and other considerations? Secretary. The most important that is to have a public participation engagement through reviewing the AQOs. We have this process within involve the experts and academics and public engagement, which we accept opinion views all sides in designing a suitable mechanism. I know that you do public engagement. However, in the course of the review, in the process, do you put the public health first? I think it will be a comprehensive consideration that where possible, we would try to improve Hong Kong's air quality to reduce emissions. So when you were doing the AQO review, I think you remember that you come to Let's Go for the ordinance. I moved an amendment that was not passed because we want to put the public health as the and the legislation. However, this motion was defeated. Though it was defeated, so when reviewing this AQOs, I hope that you can have undertaking that you would put the public health first. I couldn't think of any other area that could outweigh the public health. I understand there will be a public engagement. I know that there will be a basket of factors for consideration. However, is public health the most important? Any supplements? Who will take the question? And Ms. Alice Chung, I believe that the public health and the OOQ are essentially the same thing, because this AQO is the concentration of several pollutants, and when it all comes down to health issues. And in the course of our review, so maybe just go through it briefly. So different experts have come up with different suggestions, for example, on transport and vessels. So hopefully that on the whole, the pollutants can be reduced. That I understand. Well, that is understood by everyone. For in responding to my question, they came to assessing the 公眾健。
呢個 public health 同埋
Then you put public health and economy as an equivalent to one another and come in the table. So isn't public health more important than economics? Is public health more important than the economy? Secretary, I know that what Mr. Kwok is getting at. So we have the clean air blueprint that is a public health anchored policy. So different members of the public will hold different opinions. So after discussion with the expert, so the suggestion we take out that we will need to engage the public. Mr. Charles Mock, I hope that the government officials will give a more direct answer. So as for the ENB, that you can't just claim that you don't, they put public health first. So ENB 165166 for 165. I like it about policy on EVs and future planning, and 166 on charging facilities for EVs and resource allocation issues. So whether any timetable to phase out fuel engine vehicles, of course you don't have it at this stage, but would you be willing to consider it or carry out discussion and studies, or as to policies on promoting EVs on charging facilities? So you're not able to give us a direct answer. So you can't give us a definite time. You can't even have any timeline or a program. So there's no specific timetable or allocation for 166 for the final paragraph. In light of a rapid change in the change of EVs, the government is reviewing the various policies and measures on promoting the use of EVs, including exploring ways to encourage installation of charging facilities to tie in with the usage of EVs and retrofitting existing car parks with charging facilities. The last sentence most important. Specific timetables with estimated expenditure are not available for the time being, quote. So as we can see that the government always only won't go ahead unless you have the money and the people. I'm afraid that you are stuck at the discussion stage and have no programs. So this year, this coming year, we don't need to think about it because you don't have the money or the staff. So after this review, and then you have to wish to create a position, that will take about a year or so, and then will take 2 to 3 years. Chairman, just last week we have a amendments motion that were passed. All the amendments would have been passed unanimously, urging the government to expeditiously come up with all these relevant policies. Can you give it a more precise answer? Did you have any program plans to take them forward? I'm asking you to come with any policy. I'm afraid that you don't have any policy with staff, and you claim there's no timetable, no estimates. Can you let the Secretary take the question? Under Secretary. Thank you for member's question. So the government, of course, has the determination to do some work on the vehicles. As for your question, whether we would set a timetable on the use of cleaner energy cars. Of course, we can't set a timetable now. I explained many times that our difficulty lies in that we import our cars. We don't have a local automobile industry. We cannot control the timetable. Thus, we need to look at other countries, how their timetables have been formulated. We need to look at the supply situation. After getting all this information, we can then decide whether we can set up a timetable. If so, when. So we will definitely start working on that. So, Chairman, I'd like to ask you about the estimate rather than a policy question. But instead, the Undersecretary answered me the question on policy. So, without any budget, how would you go ahead? So, for the coming year, so we can forget about anything happening. So, that's my question.
Well, we will use our existing staff to collect information
Also, departments and bureau will discuss what we need to do to promote electric vehicles, so we can do so with our existing staff. Ms. Tanya Chen, I hope you won't lose your cool hearing the Environment Bureau's answer, because otherwise it will be widely reported. ENB 0171, 071. It's also about electric vehicles. Now, if you don't even have the money, it'd be tough on trying to set a target, because if you don't have the money, then you don't have the people. Then there is actually a steering committee on promoting the use of EVs. Actually, as Mr. Charles Ma pointed out, last week we had a motion debate on the electric vehicles, the steering committee on the promotion of electric vehicles. The Ombudsman carried out an independent study, and all of a sudden this steering committee was reincarnated, and then they started to have meetings. But since it was set up in 2009, at the beginning it worked very hard, but then in the past year or two, there were just 2 meetings a year. Of course, attendance rate was all right. Now my question is, this is supposed to be a high-level steering committee because it's chaired by the Financial Secretary. Would you consider providing more information on the steering committee online? Because online there's very little, it's a scanty information. We just know about the terms of reference and the membership. That's all online. And there are just 2 meetings a year, but what is the agenda of each meeting? Are there any meeting papers or minutes of the meetings? Could this be made accessible to the public? So for commercial vehicles or private vehicles, are there any targets? What measures will follow? The previous and the existing steering committee have said they rarely discussed policy matters. So would you consider strengthening the work of this steering committee to promote the whole exercise? Because the FS heads the steering committee. So the Environment Bureau and the Transport and Housing Bureau would just focus on the growth of the vehicle fleet, and then they try to ask for compromises. With the SS at the helm, he may be able to override the Bureau. So in terms of tax concessions, the overall planning, or the control of the vehicle fleet size, there could be a comprehensive approach. Who will take the question, please? Mrs. Zhang? Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me clarify. That it's not the case that this steering committee was reincarnated all of a sudden 1 year, but rather it's always been there and it's been holding 2 meetings a year. Now, Ms. Chen asked whether there could be more information put online. Yes, we'll consider it. But in terms of policy, usually our practice is that if there are measures in mind, then this will be discussed at the committee, but we will consider how we could provide more information online in response to your question. Would you consider enhancing the functions of the steering committee since the FS chairs it? And you said this steering committee has a long history, so shouldn't you do more riding on your success, if there's any? Well, the steering committee will discuss all many policy initiatives, and this will become reality. Of course, I know some members believe we need to do more in terms of policy, but then the discussions of the steering committee could be seen in our initiatives. For example, try pilot schemes for more types of vehicles. We tried electric taxis. We also tried electric commercial vehicles. While you may not be able to see the process as such, but you could see the effort of the steering committee realized in our initiatives. And also the steering committee, there's discussion on the development of electric commercial and private vehicles. And also there's information on the provision of charging facilities in private premises, and then we will devise our policy accordingly. Now, my question asks whether the government has set a percentage for electric vehicles. The government's reply is that there is no such a target. Now, in the UK and the Netherlands, there is actually a timetable for banning petrol vehicles. Japan, South Korea, Spain, there are also official targets for electric vehicles. And so you say they're not free market because you say in a free market there should be such a target. Now, if you say that it's not easy for us to do so in Hong Kong, I can understand it, but please don't try to explain it away with the reasons you gave it. They sound strange. Let's not talk about for supporting measures for now. In the past few years, we see while fluctuation in the number of electric vehicles sold, it has very much to do with tax concessions. I can see that the government doesn't want to see an indefinite growth of private vehicles. That's why we've come up with the 1-for-1 replacement scheme. But I don't see that this scheme would be effective in encouraging people to switch to electric vehicles in large number. Now, for the FRT of electric vehicle is half or a percentage of the FRT for petrol vehicles. If the price of an EV is smaller, then it's equal to half of FRT for petrol vehicles. But if a car EV expensive, then the percentage is smaller. So what does that achieve? That means you won't achieve encourage people who don't want to buy a car to buy a car because it's still expensive. But then you would encourage people who want to buy cars to go for electric vehicles. It's a matter of calculation, is that right? So what you're doing now will not make much difference, except you say this is 1-for-1. Let's say someone does want to buy a car and he has not yet made up his mind. Let's say if someone wants to buy a new petrol car, he'll buy it because there's no 1-for-1. But then he could also consider buying an electric vehicle, and that would make a huge difference. So why don't you consider doing something in this respect? Is there any reason? Yes, it's rather complicated. I'm sure you appreciate that we don't want private vehicles to grow too quickly. We've heard views of members of this council and the community. They all suggested a 1-for-1 scheme. Now, it's too early to comment on the effectiveness of the scheme. I have seen feedback is mostly positive. For the $250,000 FRT waiver, for a cheaper electric vehicle, the effect is a complete waiver of the FRT. But if someone hasn't got a car yet, he wants to buy a car, but he will pay the same FRT, whether it's a petrol or the electric vehicle. So why do you take this broad brush approach? Why don't you have, tiered system in favor of EVs? Now, if someone buys a new electric vehicle, that's FRT concession of $97,500, but $97,500 do nothing, because when compared to petrol cars, the person will actually consider it rather than electric vehicle. But if someone buys an electric vehicle that's not too expensive, then $97,500 would be quite decent amount of concession. Ms. Claudia Mo.
So besides reducing emissions, at the same time, we also care about the animals, especially the wildlife animals. 24, 25, 26. For wildlife, of course, it was ambit of the ENB. Of course, all the animal rights topics can be put within under ENB. Instead of some of them were put to the Food and Health Bureau. So what? Food safety, they're not food. For dolphins, you have to be fall under your ambit. Hope the secretary can discuss it with the chief executive. I raised that to her before, and she replied that she might consider it. So 24, I regret that the members of the LegCo have bring an oral question complaining about the wild pigs infesting Hong Kong. So they are actually harmless. So for the contraception scheme of the wild pigs, you claim that you're not infective. Now they have a new vaccine that you seem to have a lot of faith in. Just for the the issue deal with wild pigs, you have reserved 12 million, and yes, for the contraceptive, you only reserved for 3.5 million. For what the rest of the money for? So the wild pig hunting team should no longer exist, does it? Director of Agriculture, Fisheries and Conservation. I still have two questions. The relevant funding before using the new contraceptive scheme. We'll also have a new dedicated personnel to deal with complaints, as well as to step up in education publicity, for example, not to feed wildlife, and we'll also work with the FEHD that how to improve the design of the litter bins so that the wild pigs will not rummage through them. Second question, 26, on dolphins. I know that the government had designated a marine park could be of assistance. However, looking at the figures for 2014 to 87, 2015 65, 2016 just 47 left. For the latest 27 figures, they're still underestimate. So I can't ask you to save them. They could have migrated elsewhere on their own accord. So for the finless porpoise that have been highly protected endangered species in 2013, so there have been estimates on the finless porpoise and the landhouse waters. So why do you have no such figures? Would you consider restarting this survey? Director of Fisheries, now consider China's white dolphin in our recurrent survey. For 2016, when we have the biodiversity plan and actions BASP, we also look into how do we do the study on the finless porpoise. However, they are spread over a wide area, so for this study we need to do some careful planning. So please bear with me. Last question. So the name Hong Kong comes from the word incense trees. So these are actually a precious commodity. However, the number of incense trees have keep on falling. As for the police, for the lack of enforcement, so I shouldn't force the director of AFC to respond to the question on police enforcement. They claim there will be a strategic that's response from 027, there will be strategic locations using infrared detection and to monitor the incense trees. So if somebody want to dig up, would you sound an alarm? So can you explain how that work? As for this infrared detection, we have to choose locations. Don't tell us where they are. We have to at locations with more such kind of trees. After the installed trees, if someone walk past, they have a signal deputy sent to our contractor. Once the contractor receives our signal, they will deliver a picture. If someone is suspicious chopping a tree, they will notify us right away and will follow up, including calling the police. Next, Mr. Eddie Chu. So 3 questions. I try to be quick. ENB 18. As we all know that Hong Kong may be the most cities with a city with the most of mountain fires. Most of them are man-made. I say all of them are man-made. For the response to question 18, so the question mentioned that in the past they have planted 400,000 seedlings. So can I ask the Bureau, so after the year of forest fire, how many of the seedlings for the Qingming Festival there are 90-something forest fire reported? So for the number of a forest fire compared to the decade ago, from over 100-something per year, it only get to a dozen or so. Sometimes a dozen, sometimes 20-something. Isn't that funny? For the past Qingming Festival, the news reported over 90 incidents alone in just one single day. So, it's within our ambit within the country parks area. So, the number reported does not reflect the whole situation, and the loss of trees due to fire in the country parks area. We're talking about 100 of thousands per year. So, for the annual planting of 400,000 per year, so able to numerically able to compensate the fires lost due to forest fire. So maybe the department or the bureau have specific measures that for the bureau areas, maybe you can have a fireproof zone. Well, because they're inevitable, they will sweep graves here so that not let the fire to infringe on the country park areas. For the fireproof zone is one of the fire prevention strategy. As for where to set up this fire zones, and as for all the conduct vegetation, the vegetation depends on the environment and the suitability. They didn't quite ask me a question. Talk about the burial areas, the surroundings. And Nam Sang Wai, which plays a lot of mysterious fires, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature have a management agreement. I noticed that the 2 private land has no management agreement. Can you proactively have this management agreement extended to private lots? The members referring to the Lamsar site, the Deep Bay Lamsar site, and the fish ponds are the most ecologically important. So a huge proportion of the fish ponds are using our environment and conservation fund. Is there any room for expansion? Depends on the landowner or any organizations suitable. I think we can explore it. Can you proactively explore this possibility? I think the Bureau can go back to think about it. Another question. Then FSTB is organizing launching green bonds that seems to have nothing to do with the ENB. Now that we have $100 billion green bonds, is there any green works related to the Capital Works Reserve Fund? So we're discussing at an interdepartment level. So we'll think about it. Next, Mr. Ted Hui. Can you give us a few projects? So it involve more than ENB and EDP. So other projects, if they meet the requirement, so the department are coordinating. I don't seem to be able to learn much from you, Mr. Ted Hui. So my question is on EVs, ENB 072. For the one-for-one replacement, I believe this is a step in the right direction. Have taken on board my view along others. Looking at the report, the first month there are only 11 applications, which is far from satisfactory. Well, for the two conditions are unappealing, or that the car has to be more than 6 years old and to be owned for 3 consecutive years. So can you add a way to relax the... So before the announcement of the budget, if we don't restrict it for 3-year consecutive ownership, so before the announcement date, there's no such less opportunistic buyer to take advantage of this scheme. So can you, in this way, they will greatly increase the number of eligible cars. So have you consider this? Of course, after announcement, I don't think shouldn't let this happening. So can you have this cut off to relax the eligibility?
Briefly, in the next few years, for cars that could meet all the criteria, that would cover about 75% of private car owners, so 3 in 4. So if piece of legislation covers 70–80% of the group, is already a high coverage. So I believe this is a good balance. But then in the first month, there are just 11 applications. So your scheme will fail at the end. So please consider my suggestion. I believe there is room for relaxing criteria. And you could also avoid the case of people buying cars for scrapping to benefit from the scheme. And so if you could relax the criteria, then you can encourage more people to switch to EVs sooner. 094. Yacht waste. Area of concern to me. I asked you about the department in charge of dealing with yacht waste from 2014 to 2017. Now, there is a trend of yacht waste being dumped at landfill in an increasing volume by different departments. 14,200. 96% of the yacht waste is actually dumped at landfill. Now you have an 8-year plan, it's halfway through already, but still 96% of yacht waste ends up at landfill. So what have you done? You said the EPD has an interdepartmental working group. What have you done? Because still 96% of yacht waste goes to the landfills. Yes. Thank you for the question. In the reply, there's mention of yacht waste generated by departments and the amount of waste that the yacht waste has gone to the landfill. Yacht waste as a percentage of municipal solid waste is 1.7% per day being dumped at the landfill. For government departments, it's 3 to 4%. Now, I'm not saying that because the percentage is low, therefore we don't need to do anything in disposing of yacht waste. But we have to consider what can be done with yacht waste. The government will have regard to the types of refuse or waste. There could be biodegradation, or so the waste can be turned into fertilizer and whatever. But for FCD, we have large areas of country parks, so it's best to leave yacht waste for natural degradation. But other departments will have regard to their own situation. For example, CSD, since 2014, is been providing more composting facilities at its venues to deal with yacht waste. Last year, the LCSD has already provided composting facilities at many of their venues. There are about 150 venues with composting facilities, but some have not yet been commissioned. So in the next year or two, government departments, in particular the LCSD, would have high capacity in dealing with in handling yard waste. Next, Mr. Jeremy Tam. 071 and 086. Now, the government said it won't provide more charging facilities because the driving range is good now, could reach 150 kilometers. It could meet day-to-day journey needs. But then when we ask government why the government is using so few EVs, the question given is that the battery capacity of electric vehicles is not yet satisfactory. There's a relatively short driving range. So what are you saying? When I ask you to provide more charging facilities, you say there's no need because the driving range is much improved. But then when we ask the government why you're not using more EVs, and then you say the driving range is not good enough. So what are you doing? If you think the driving range for private vehicles is good, and how come the government has only 254 vehicles out of a fleet of 6,290 vehicles? In the past year, for the private vehicles, yes, it's true there is a significant improvement in the driving range for private vehicles. That's why we'll work with relevant government departments to increase the percentage of EVs in the government fleet. Now, if you want to promote EVs, but officials won't use EVs, then how do you persuade the public to use EVs? I hope you will substantially increase the number. Is there a percentage target? For example, say within 2 or 3 years in the government fleet, there should be a certain percentage of electric cars. Well, we will be proactive in looking at the operation of government vehicles. We are actively looking to that. Well, you say you're being active, but I don't see it. The government's fleet is over 6,000 cars, but there are just 250 electric vehicles. So I hope you will work much harder. The other question is on the 1-for-1 scheme. The government, the secretary said that for every private vehicles, 3 would meet the criteria. Now you are now offering a deduction of $250,000. If you buy an EV, you already get an FLT concession of $97,500. So that means you're just getting an extra $150,000 in concession. Well, even if a car is 6 years or higher, the value may be more than $150,000 for certain models. Or if the car is just 7 or 8 years old, is it due for scrapping? No, I think it's not environmentally friendly, actually, to do so. Now, you say that for every 4 vehicles, 3 vehicles will be eligible. I think that there's distortion of the fact. Let's say you drive a car for 6 or 7 years. Let's say you pay $300,000 for a new car and you drive it for 6 years or 5 years. It's still worth $100,000 or so. So for $100,000, you're just getting in exchange an additional concession of $50,000 or so. So who would do so? Only those with cars worth $30,000 or $40,000 would be attracted to the scheme. And then we're talking about driving a car for 15 years or 20 years before that car would drop to a price of $30,000, $40,000. But of course, again, depends on the brand and model. But so what you're saying is does not represent the full picture. Now, the fact is, since you launched the scheme, there are just 11 applications. So I think that's an objective way to tell you that your scheme is not appealing. Secretary, would you consider improving the scheme? A number of members have asked about it. Well, let's wait a bit longer to see what the response is. Next, Mr. Shu Ka-chun. Thank you. I'll let you take a break. I won't ask about the electric vehicles because it's such a tough nut to crack. EMB 172. you say you will set aside $30 million to improve public recycling bins and so on. Now, do you regularly review the effectiveness of such recycling bins, in terms of the design, the location, the volume, the collection volume, and publicity channels, and so on? Do you have regular review to see whether you're doing enough? For the tricolor recycling facilities at roadside, really, I just can't stand them. I understand, I've heard that the recycling rate is less than 1%, so it's really most ineffective. I don't know if it's true. Perhaps we could make reference to the practices of some. For example, working together with the scavengers. Well, maybe we shouldn't call them scavengers. It doesn't sound nice. But we can call them recycling ambassadors who reduce waste. They make a living from scavenging. Some studies show that if they are asked to carry out the recycling, the efficiency will be increased by more than 80%. Because they know what to pick from amongst garbage that they can sell, and they make a living off that. So they're in other places like Colombia or Brazil. There's experience or examples of working together with scavengers. Maybe you can pick a few streets or a small area, and then you just leave it to them, and so they will collect the aluminum tins, glass, plastic bottles, and so on. Now, if you do that, then the money, the $30 million, won't just be spent on the studies. Now, we see people just leaving the bottles on top of the recycling bins. And because the recycling bins are so dirty, no one dares touch them or push open the flap. So that's why no one puts things in the recycling bin. So your response, please, Secretary. Let me say this first. If you look around the world, for roadside recycling bins or waste bins, they are not the main channels for recycling. So it doesn't matter whether they're effective or not. That's not the key channels for recycling. It's the case everywhere else, and it's the case in Hong Kong. Now we have interdepartmental effort to review the design and the layout of recycling bins across the territory. That would be a better way for us to make improvement. Thank you. I'll ask my colleagues to supplement. For recycling bins in public space, as Mr. Shields pointed out, we see there are two areas that require review. First is the location or the distribution of recycling bins. Now, when people want to use the recycling bins, often they don't know where they are. So in terms of distribution of recycling bins, we want the public to perhaps to be able to find one every few blocks. And then for roadside recycling bins, the design is not so convenient. Also, cleanliness is a concern too to the public. That's why we have engaged a consultant to look at the design of roadside recycling bins. We see how we could improve the design and make it easier for the public to use. So in the second half of the year, we will be consulting you on how we could improve the design on the whole and boost the utilization rate of the recycling bins. Thank you.
Ms. Eunice Yung, ENB40, on the nuisance caused by monkeys. And now that we have monkeys invading homes, and now the AFCD is using conventional methods, for example, catching contraception, neutering. However, they're not effective, and some of the view the government should crack down on illegal feeding. Of course, humans need to be educated. However, I think monkey are a smart animal. If you put the bait trap, they may not step in because they know there is danger ahead. So may I ask the administration, they claim that you will entrust a consultancy to carry a study. So looking at the scope is only improving the refuse collection bins, but you even consider and deal with the issue of a nuisance caused by monkeys to residents. AFCD, on the issue of monkeys, the true source problem that most of the incidents invading homes were due to as food source, including the refuse collection point, the rubbish bins, the monkey can rummage for food, and the public has been very affectionate in always feeding them. So address this for the refuse collection point and design of rubbish bins. We have to enhance the design so that the monkeys and the wild pigs were not able to obtain any food. And for the education and enforcement, we need to step up. Hope that the public can stop feeding wildlife, so that we can control the problem at the source, and through our sustained neutering program from 2007 to 17 this year, where over 1,300 monkeys have been neutered, and a birth rate from 60% had dropped to 35%. The overall monkey population from 2,500 had dropped to 1,800 to 1,900. So it would seem to take a multi-pronged approach to reduce the nuisance of monkeys to residents. I'm worried that if you modify the design of the rubbish bins, that would prevent them from foraging or coming near to our residences. However, will that lead to attack people and to invading homes because they're not able to find any food? We're not can teach monkeys. Will only prevent them from foraging food in rubbish bin. But what if can't find any food? What will they do? Will the government look into that? On one hand, the monkeys' natural environment had enough food. Why would they come down to human dwellings? Because they're attracted by easily obtained food. On the other hand, AFCD will plant some plants for monkey to eat in country parks. I believe that they need to go. Both measures need to go side by side. So on one hand, we crack down the source of the problem, and we also need to provide more food in the natural environment so that the monkey population can return to the countryside. For 2017-18, the expenditure is about 4.8 million. In the coming year, they will allocate 5 million. So we have a similar amount for both years. For this 5 million, would it be an effective amount to reduce monkey population able to carry out publicity work? Because this work only not happened last year or this year, it's been a long-going initiative, so there is enough allocation. So a slight increase is for carry publicity and education. For example, recently we shoot some AP items to appeal to the public not to feed wildlife. Dr. Elizabeth Quat, on EVs, I think the Secretary should at least set a target for the government fleet, and in a coming few years, what is the proportion of EVs so as to play the lead example. My question that on protection of endangered species. A few years ago, the previous administration government has this checklist in which the government what the government would not officials would not eat or use in banquets or functions. I wonder what's the progress and what's the contents of the checklist. Besides the secretaries attending functions not to eat or use anything, is that all the officers, that how many public officers will use this checklist of endangered species? Would you go further that all the functions attended by public officers, they should not supply the items on the list of the checklist, and also advise the subsidized vendor organizations not to eat anything on the checklist, as well as to advertise to the public to stop eating the species in the checklist. Thank you for your members' concern. In the previous administration, have an internal document that applicable to the officers for holding banquets, that they will notify the organizers to prevent choosing endangered species, and we have refreshed the list in the new government, so we can provide the member with that list. So we will review from time to time this to tie in with the BASP, and hope the government can lead by example, and when suitable, we can communicate with the sector and the companies, because the protection of species will need to get more members of the public on board with this. So the Bureau will claim that we will provide such a checklist. So in intended events, so I see the public officers, they would eat hair plant or shark's fin. However, they claim they won't eat it. However, they're spread all over the table, because even though you refuse to eat it, and yet the organizers will still include it as part of the menu. So now that the Secretary heard my suggestion, besides the public officers refusing to eat them or not to prefer them not to on the menu, and for providing such kind of species, you can just decline invitation. You shouldn't add harder stance would help the situation in promoting the public and appealing to the offended organization would help. And now the public and government claims that in protecting endangered species, they would consider the provisions in the CITES, and the government will only take action that will allocate more resources and to take action. However, looking at the list, for example, shark's fin, and not all the shark species is in the CITES list, and yet the government agreed like the bluefin tuna and the shark fins are considered endangered species that need to be protected and conserved. That I commended the government for, and yet the policy is inconsistent. So in the checklist, you claim that you would not eat them, and when it comes to enforcement and the protection, these two species are not included. For the bluefin tuna and the shark's fin is not on the list of species to be protected by the government. Isn't this kind of inconsistency? Can you be more uniform? Hopefully, the government could do more to protect these species. Brief answer. And Dr. Kwat come out and said, Hong Kong come up with their first BASP that include areas of members' concern. So within this 5 years, we'll devote more resources. Some of them were the easier ones. We can lead by example or promotion for the legislation, and members understand that we need to deliberate, that we could take it step by step. Hope the government can devote more effort and beef up on the publicity. Ms. Eunice Young, ENB 188. I'd like to ask the Recycling Fund. On the 27th, there are 17 applications rejected. Will the government review the application threshold? I saw that you explained that incomplete document supplementation, insufficient information, or not complying with the recycling requirements. But is the threshold too high? We heard that from the sector. Is there any room for relaxation? Mr. Tong. All along, we're communicating with the sector. We'll continue to do so. We understand the trade or the applicants' inconvenience, so that we will remove the red tape, and we've done it in the past and we'll do so in the future. And besides a regular review, we also will consider commence a large-scale interim review. We'll also comprehensively evaluate any room for relaxation. We have some ideas. We need to communicate with the trade and the relevant panel, and maybe aware concern with the provisions for the application to the FC, so we need to see the consent from the FC members. So we will come back later. So hearing from the adver, do we first to consult before conducting this interim review? We're already preparing for this. Well, first we will get sector involved because we want to make the sector easier to apply, and we very much would like to have more applicants. So after approving, and after we're concerned about the withdrawal of successful applications, we're encouraging them to reconsider. And sometimes it will have to do with the market in the world or other factors. However, we maintain close liaison with the sector. Will come back to exam for any room for amendment. We'll help to remove the obstacles, have more people applying for them. As for 128 subsidized projects, there are what projects will fall into the success cases? Upstream, midstream, lowstream, downstream. The most cases are the downstream, and very often before collection, to also purchase of machinery or transport equipment, so to improve their transport efficiency and to lower their processing costs. Dr. Quat, 3 minutes left. So in the Secretary's speech, there's no mention on light pollution and noise pollution. So in a year come here that the government had no plans to deal with noise and light pollution because I've received a lot of complaints. Secretary, who will take the question? So very quickly, we have plans that within this year we'll do a survey to listen to the public and the stakeholders on the voluntary charter, as well as the an adoption. We'll also look at other places on the arrangement dealing with light pollution and the relevant ordinances. By then, we will consider whether the effectiveness of the voluntary charter and the public expectations and the trade concerns. So taking in all the views on board, we will offer suggestion for whether, for example, whether to legislate in dealing with light pollution. Noise pollution? Let me supplement on noise pollution. We take noise pollution very seriously. On one hand, we have transport noise, and last week we had a project PWSC been supported and to build noise barriers. And currently we have 2 noise barriers project coming up, one pending and FC, and we have 21 project in the works. And for the 70 road sections for the we have tried to use low noise road sections. And another concern, and the loudspeakers from shops. We are taking a proactive approach to step of regulation, and we have managed to do a lot of successful prosecutions. And Jin Long Yun Wan, they consider the situation has improved. So we do care about the public concern. For the light pollution study, when will it commence? When did it commence? We'll prepare to commence this year. So what month we're talking about? So let's say lower half. That will commence a study and engaging a consultant. See. Well, time's up. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.